Hi, my name is Julian, and today I will be presenting on the chapter Animal Tracks, Affect, Aesthetics, and Ethics from the book Voice Tracks, Attuning to Voice in Media and the Arts by Norrie Newmark. In this chapter, Newmark writes about artworks that explore the relationships between humans and animals, especially those that use voice. Newmark also suggests that artworks can make relations rather than merely displaying them. Why does she do this? She observes that contemporary artists are increasingly examining the relationships between humans and animals in their work. She argues that this is a part of new materialist thinking. New materialist thinking aims to dissolve categories, binaries, for example, subject/object, nature, culture, human and animal, and object and machine. There are also many crossovers, and hierarchical distinctions, humans at the top as exceptional beings, blah 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 blah, and to promote the post-human and ecological perspective. Some key points in new materialist thinking are nature and culture are intertwined and cannot be separated. Humans aren't the only things that have agency, can change the world around them. Animals and inanimate objects can too. Beavers can make dams and cut off water supplies, or tectonic plates can destroy Chapel Street. In these works, contemporary artists are thinking of animals as a new form of other. Newmark argues, theoretically and ethically, new materialism helps us attend to animals' voices, opening us up to the recognition of their own specificity, singularity, and entanglements. In this chapter, she looks at the works of Domestic Vigilancia, Reading the Birds, Shooting the Breeze, Sid and George, and The Way You Move Me. In each work, she unpacks some of the way these artists extend concepts of new materialism. Domestic Vigilancia, or Kathy's Cat, is a video work by Kathy High, featuring her cat. The work itself shows Kathy in the midst of an existential crisis while managing her cat who is vomiting. While she lays out newspaper for the cat to vomit on, we hear her on the phone talking to a medium about her fear of dying in the near future. In Domestic Vigilancia, there are many different voices. The telephone, which is the voice of the medium, the cat, and Kathy. Newmark experiences a mimetic response from Kathy's cat as it is gagging and throwing up. She also gags as the viewer of the video. This is, as she writes, a visceral ethical reminder of how close people and animals are. A mimetic response, as Newmark explains, comes from copying a physical experience of another creature to feel and be with that creature. She says mimetic responsiveness enables an understanding of common capacities, making a response and feeling and thinking with the other being with as opposed to being like. A mimetic response is a part of being attuned with another being. It draws from philosophers Haraway and Desperate, breaking down the division between human and animal. Attunement is another way of thinking about the border between animal and human. It is the state of feeling with another being. Side note, an interesting observation in modern science is people who have had Botox struggle to move their face to mirror other people's emotions, and as a consequence, struggle to identify what emotions other people are expressing. This is an interesting example of the effects of not being able to have a mimetic response. The shared capacity of distress and anxiety between Kathy and her cat brings up a question of whether animals can fear death. The video is about Kathy's fear of death. What is interesting is that when you are watching the video presented with Kathy's existential dread, and you see the cat's distress and anxiety through its vomiting, you cannot help but wonder if the cat is also fearing death in that moment. You see this attunement between Kathy and her cat, and you also see the possibility of the cat's subjective experience through Kathy. This is an example of how the artwork is testing the boundaries between human and animal. The subject/object divide is broken. The medium's voice through the telephone is another blurring of the subject/object. The telephone itself becomes the medium of the medium. The telephone has agency and a voice, blurring the lines between human and object. Newmark identifies the phone, the cat, and Kathy as an assemblage of people, animal, machine, life, and death. Newmark refers to another idea in her analysis of Kathy's cat, Deleuze and Guattari's becoming animal. This is embracing the idea of multiplicity, for example, being one of a pack. Becoming animal happens by contagion or unlearning. This is important to the materialist breaking down of boundaries. As she writes, artworks like Kathy High's can give force to Deleuze and Guattari's evocations of contagions and intensities. going beyond the limiting and recognizable boundaries between human and animal, and the fixities of both, as they provoke us to see and listen, to feel and sense differently. Artworks can focus us not on what is human and what is animal, but as becomings, on what can be possible, on what bodies can do, separately and together, energizing the imagination. They can disturb what we know and expect. Newmark unpacks two works by Catherine Clover, Reading the Birds and Shooting the Breeze. In Reading the Birds, Clover is in a grotty inner urban setting near a train line, car park, and bike path. Underneath a tree, she has a fold-out table with various bird guides and reads from Daphne du Maurier's book, The Birds. Clover's second work, Shooting the Breeze, is an installation in a room on top of Flinders Street. The walls are covered with transcriptions of urban bird sounds. Visitors to the work can use field glasses to look out over the cityscape while listening to headphones which play a track of the urban soundscape. The install has a performative element during which Clover and others read out the transcribed voices of the birds. There is no visual representation of the birds. You have to see the actual thing with the field glasses. According to Newmark, Clover's work is a collaboration between human and birds, with a focus on unlearning old ways of listening. Clover doesn't treat the birds' voices as nice sounds, but tries to listen to them as their own language, as communication between individuals living their lives. This work listens to the culture of nature instead of seeing culture as exclusively human. Newmark connects this work to Tim Ingold's objection to separating natural soundscapes into individual parts, taking away from the embeddedness of all creatures in their environment. She also links it to Jacques von Uxel, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, its concept of umwelt or perpetual life worlds. Uxel argues that an object in a shared species environment will have very different meanings and uses for each species, even though they are in an overlapping space. They have their own inner subjective sensory experience of their world. Tim Ingold would have it in their own dwelling world, which they perceive and act in according to their own particular sensory spectrum. To Clover, the birds are neither subjects or objects, but just occurring, simply there. Clover's work resists removing animals from their environment. She gives language to the pigeons, or demonstrates that language by transcribing the sounds they make onto the walls, along with other sounds of humans, from the perspective of a pigeon. She also includes every element of a soundscape rather than slicing it up, as per Tim Ingold's criticism of soundscaping and any form of scaping. The third artwork that Newmark looks at is Sid and George. This work consists of Sid, the violinist, and George, the lyrebird. They perform together a radio artwork in a series of vibrational responses, morphing, mimicking, and melding into each other. As the work progresses, distinguishing the violin from the lyrebird becomes more difficult. Newmark draws a connection between the idea of humming as a vibration with the work of Sid and George. Michael Tossig argues that humming is a voice, connection, and affiliation between animals, humans, and machines. This is because every single thing, including machines, humans, and animals, produces sound through a hum or a vibration. Humming disrupts the subject and object division between animals and machines. Tossig says it is all about becoming, thinking, and moving, as all those actions are linked to humming. Lyrebirds are known for their ability to accurately mimic other sounds, including other Australian birds, camera shutters, and chainsaws, collapsing the separation of sound between humans, animals, and machines. In the work, the lyrebird not only mimics a violin, but the violin also begins to mimic the lyrebird. Newmark states that the morphing of voices between bird, violin, reveals the hybridity of voice. This breaks down the border between nature and culture, human versus animal, machine, and subject versus object. In the fourth artwork, The Way You Move Me, Newmark observes a connection between the physical movement and emotion in multiple interspecies relationships. This artwork makes me think of the pack in the becoming animal concept, because the work consists of sheep and cattle being herded in rural Australia. Human voices are mostly edited out of the video, while the voices of the animals and the landscape are amplified. Newmark makes a close observation of a dog's panting. Breath is the beginning of the voice, and dogs are the mediator of communication between the humans and cows, sheep, etc. This too is reminiscent of the telephone from domestic Vigilancia. The dog is voice. This mediation between the motion and sound and movement breaks down the human and animal and machine divide. The human can only control the herd through the dogs. The title of the work captures the question, who is moving who? Newmark sees how voice in these artworks allow the artist to ask what it is to be human and have agency, and to be a subject. Her final examples include Sherry Dale's long ago parrot in an interior, in which Dales has a conversation with the parrot named Ajax. Newmark wonders if she starts to sense what the parrot Ajax senses by listening to the conversation and the lack of cooperation from the parrot. After the conversation, it is revealed that multiple birds have provided the voice to Ajax, compelling Newmark to wonder the line between the authentic and performed. The birds refuse to be fully understood or known. They stay in their own subjective universe. To finish, I need to briefly mention Natalie Jeremijenko's Mussel Choir. Mussels are given voice based on the quality of the water they filter, and when all these voices are put together, they form a choir. Sophia Ruth talks about how being doused in alcohol makes yeasts scream. All these works give voice to life, even the single-celled, which begs how far down can you go before life is no longer life. A critique I have against becoming animal is it implies humans need to become animal. This is done through unlearning what it is to be human. But this unlearning how to be human implies a divide between the human and animal that isn't actually there, because we are already animals. Finally, Newmark uses Mitchell thinking of animals being the frontier of cultural difference or a new other, which is true for academics and perhaps most of society, but doesn't acknowledge the fact that race, gender, religion, neurodiversity, and sexuality still define people as otherly. Thank you for listening.